On January 30, 1945, a motley army of U.S. Rangers, Alamo Scouts and Filipino guerrillas pulled off one of the most daring rescue missions of World War II. Trapped behind enemy lines, with over 250 Imperial Japanese Army guards and a division of Japanese troops less than 10 kilometers away, are 500 Allied prisoners of war. This is the story of the Raid of Cabanatuan, the daring mission to liberate Allied POWs in the Philippines. Following the fall of Bataan on the 9th of April 1942 and the rest of the Philippines afterwards, the Imperial Japanese forces found tens of thousands of POWs on their hands. Various internment camps are set up throughout the country in varying degrees of depravity. Among these is the former U.S. military camp in Cabanatuan, a city some 160 kilometers northeast of Manila. Following the capture of Camp O'Donnell in Bataan, the Japanese are faced with a huge task of taking care of their captives. That's why Cabanatuan and other prison camps were set up. But as American forces under General Douglas MacArthur are starting to recapture the Philippines, the Japanese High Command in Tokyo sends order to neutralize Allied prisoners in the Philippines and prevent their rescue. Fearing for the safety of the remaining Allied captives in Japanese hands, MacArthur orders the launch of a series of raids to free the remaining prisoners. The Cabanatuan prison camp was named after the University of 50,000, locally known as Pangatian. The camp had first been used as a Department of Agriculture station and then as a training camp for the Philippine Commonwealth Army. It was one of the three camps in Cabanatuan used by the Japanese to hold ailing detainees. The rectangular-shaped camp had an area of 100 acres or 0.40 square kilometers. It was 800 yards by 600 yards deep and divided by a road that ran through its center. One side of the camp housed Japanese guards, while the other was where the hospital called Zero Ward was located. It was named Zero Ward because the chance of coming out of it alive was almost zero, with most of its occupants sickly and dying from tropical diseases like malaria and dysentery. Surrounding the intercamp were 8-foot-high barbed wire fences, multiple pillboxes, and 4-story guard towers. At its peak, the camp held 8,000 American soldiers as well as a small number of Allied troops and civilians from the United Kingdom, Norway, and the Netherlands, and making it the largest POW camp in the Philippines. This number dropped significantly as able-bodied soldiers were shipped to other parts of the Philippines, Japan, Japanese-occupied Taiwan, and Manchukuo to work in slave labor camps. As Japan had not ratified the Geneva Convention, the POWs were transported out of the camp and forced to work in factories to build Japanese weaponry, unload ships, and repair airfields. The prisoners were given 2 meals a day of meager rations. To supplement their diet, they planted crops in a small garden within a camp or subsisted in smuggled rations. To prevent extra food, jewelry, diaries, and other valuables from being confiscated, items were hidden in clothing or latrines or were buried before scheduled inspections. Prisoners collected food using a variety of methods, including stealing, bribing guards, planting gardens, and killing animals which entered the camp, such as mice, snakes, ducks, and stray dogs. The Philippine underground collected thousands of quinine tablets to smuggle into the camp to treat malaria, thus saving hundreds of lives. To monitor about the status of the war, prisoners listened to radios smuggled in or cobbled from makeshift parts by technicians who stole this from Japanese troops who had the radios repaired. A smuggled camera was also used to document the camp's deplorable living condition. Hoping for a chance to escape, prisoners also built weapons and smuggled in ammunition. In fact, multiple escape attempts have been made, but majority of this ended in failure. In one attempt, 4 soldiers were captured by the Japanese. The guards forced all prisoners to watch as the 4 soldiers were beaten, forced to dig their shallow graves, and then neutralized. Shortly thereafter, the guards put up signs declaring that if other escape attempts were made, 10 prisoners of war would be executed for every escapee. Prisoners of war's living quarters were then divided into groups of 10, which motivated the POWs to keep a close eye on others to prevent them from making any escape attempts. The Japanese permitted the POWs to build septic systems and irrigation ditches throughout the prisoner side of the camp. An on-site commissary was available to sell such items as bananas, eggs, coffee, notebooks, and cigarettes. Recreational activities allowed for baseball, horseshoes, and ping-pong matches. In addition, a 3,000 book library was allowed, much of which was provided by the Red Cross, and films were shown occasionally. A bulldog was kept by the prisoners of war and served as a mascot for the camp. Each year around Christmas, the Japanese guards gave permission for the Red Cross to donate a small box to each of the prisoners, containing items such as corned beef, instant coffee, and tobacco. Prisoners were able to send postcards to relatives, although they were censored by the guards. As American forces continued to approach Luzon, the Japanese Imperial General Headquarters ordered that all able-bodied POWs be transported to Japan. From the Cabanatuan camp, over 1,600 soldiers were removed in October 1944, leaving only 500 sick, weak, or disabled POWs. On January 6, 1945, all of the guards withdrew from the Cabanatuan camp, leaving the POWs alone. The guards had previously warned prisoners of war leaders that they should not attempt to escape, or else they would be killed. When the guards left, the prisoners of war heeded the threat, fearing that the Japanese were waiting near the camp and would use the attempted escape as an excuse to execute them all. Instead, the prisoners went to the guards' side of the camp and ransacked the Japanese buildings for supplies and large amount of food. Prisoners of war were alone for a couple of weeks, except when retreating Japanese forces would periodically stay in the camp. The soldiers mainly ignored the POWs except to ask for food. Although aware of the potential consequences, the POWs sent a small group outside the prison gates to bring in 2 carabaos to slaughter. The meat from the animals, along with the food secured from the Japanese side of the camp, helped many of the POWs to regain their strength, weight, and stamina. In mid-January, a large group of Japanese troops entered the camp and returned the prisoners of war to their side of the camp. The POWs, fueled by rumors, speculated that they would soon be executed by the Japanese. On October 20, 1944, General Douglas MacArthur's forces landed on Leyte, paving the way for the liberation of the Philippines. Several months later, as the Americans consolidated their forces to prepare for the main invasion of Luzon, nearly 150 Americans were executed by their Japanese captors on December 14, 1944 at the Puerto Princesa prison camp on the island of Palawan. Fearing a similar fate might befell those imprisoned in Cabanatuan, MacArthur decided to take action and rescue all remaining POWs in the Philippines. Thus, the raid to free Cabanatuan was made. Tasked to lead the mission was Major Robert Lafam, the senior U.S. Armed Forces in the Far East guerrilla leader. He and another guerrilla leader, Filipino Captain Juan Pajota, had considered freeing the prisoners within the camp but feared logistical issues with hiding and caring for the prisoners. An earlier plan had been proposed by Lieutenant Colonel Bernard Anderson, leader of the guerrillas near the camp. He suggested that the guerrillas would secure the prisoners, escort them 50 miles to Debut Bay, and transport them using 30 submarines. MacArthur, however, rejected Anderson's plan, fearing the Japanese might be able to catch up with the prisoners and kill them all. In addition, the Navy did not have the required submarines, especially as MacArthur was preparing for his upcoming invasion of Luzon. On January 26, 1945, Lafam traveled from his location near the prison camp to 6th Army Headquarters, 30 miles away. He proposed to Lieutenant General Walter Kruger's intelligence chief, Colonel Horton White, that a rescue attempt be made to liberate the estimated 500 POWs at the Cabanatuan prison camp before the Japanese possibly killed them all. Lafam estimated Japanese forces to include 100 to 300 soldiers within the camp, 1,000 across the Cabo River northeast of the camp, and possibly around 5,000 within Cabanatuan. Pictures of the camp were also available, as planes had taken surveillance images as recently as January 19. White recommended that any rescue attempt should be made on January 29, as the U.S. First Corps would not reach Cabanatuan until February 1. White then reported the details to Kruger, who gave the go signal for the mission. White gathered Lieutenant Colonel Henry Mucci, leader of the 6th Ranger Battalion, and 3 lieutenants from the Alamo Scouts, the Special Reconnaissance Unit attached to his 6th Army, for a briefing on the mission to raid Cabanatuan and rescue the POWs. The plan involved 14 scouts, made up of 2 teams, who would leave 24 hours ahead of the main force to survey the camp. The main force would consist of 90 Rangers from C Company and 30 from F Company, who would march 30 miles behind enemy lines, surround the camp, kill the guards, and rescue and escort the prisoners back to American lines. The Americans would link up with 80 Filipino guerrillas who would serve as guides and help in the rescue attempt. It was initially agreed that the camp attack should begin at 1730 hours local time on January 29. On the evening of January 27, the Rangers studied air reconnaissance photos and listened to guerrilla intelligence on the prison camp. Shortly after, the two five-man teams of Alamo Scouts, led by First Lieutenants William Nellist and Thomas Ronsaville, left Gimba at 1900 hours and infiltrated behind enemy lines for the long trek to attempt a reconnaissance of the prison camp. Each scout was armed with a 45 caliber pistol, 3 hand grenades, a rifle or M1 carbine, a knife, and extra ammunition. The Rangers, on the other hand, were armed with Thompson submachine guns, BERs, M1 Garand rifles, pistols, grenades, knives, and extra ammunition, as well as few bazookas. 4 combat photographers from a unit of the 83nd Signal Service Battalion volunteered to accompany the Scouts and Rangers to record the rescue after Mucci suggested the idea of documenting the raid. Each photographer was armed with a pistol. Sergeant Captain Jimmy Fisher and his medics also carried pistols and carbines. To maintain a link between the raiding group and Army Command, a radio outpost was established outside of Gimba. The force had 2 radios, but their use was only approved requesting air support if they ran into large Japanese forces or if there were last-minute changes to the raid, as well as calling off friendly fire by American aircraft. As dawn broke on January 28, Mucci and a reinforced company of 121 Rangers under Captain Robert Prince drove 60 miles or 97 kilometers to Gimba before slipping through Japanese lines at just after 1400 hours. Guided by Filipino guerrillas, the Rangers hiked through open grasslands to avoid enemy patrols. In villages along the Rangers' route, other guerrillas assisted in muzzling dogs and putting chickens in cages to prevent the Japanese hearing the traveling group. At one point, the Rangers narrowly avoided a Japanese tank on the national highway by following a ravine that ran under the road. The following morning, the group reached Balintarin, a village 8 miles north of the camp. Mucci linked up with Scouts Nellist and Ronsaville to go over the camp reconnaissance from the previous night. The Scouts revealed that the terrain around the camp was flat, which would leave the force exposed before the raid. Mucci also met with Yusufi Guerrilla Pahota and his 200 men, whose intimate knowledge of enemy activity, the locals, and the terrain proved crucial. Upon learning that Mucci wanted to push through with the raid, that evening, Pahota resisted, insisting that it would be suicide. He revealed that the guerrillas had been watching an estimated 1,000 Japanese soldiers camp out across the Cabo River just a few hundred yards from the camp. Pahota also confirmed reports that as many as 7,000 enemy troops were deployed around Cabanatuan, located several miles away. With the invading American forces from the southwest, a Japanese division was withdrawing to the north on a road close to the camp. He recommended waiting for the division to pass so that the force would face minimal opposition. After consolidating information from Pahota and the Alamo Scouts about heavy enemy activity in the camp area, Mucci agreed to postpone the raid for 24 hours and alerted the 6th Army headquarters to the development by radio. He directed the scouts to return to the camp and gain additional intelligence, especially on the strength of the guards and the exact location of the captive soldiers. The Rangers pulled back to Platero, a village 4 kilometers south of Balincarin. At 11:30 on January 30, Alamo Scouts Lieutenant Bill Nellist and Private Trupo Baquilar, disguised as locals, managed to gain access to an abandoned hut 300 yards or 270 meters from the camp. Avoiding detection by the Japanese guards, they observed the camp from the shack and prepared a detailed report on the camp's major features, including the main gate, Japanese troop strength, the location of telephone wires, and the best attack routes. Shortly thereafter, they were joined by 3 other scouts, whom Nellist tasked to deliver the report to Mucci. Nellist and Baquilar remained on the shack until the start of the raid. Mucci had already been given Nellist's January 29 afternoon report and forwarded it to Prince, whom he entrusted to determine how to get the Rangers in and out of the compound quickly and with as few casualties as possible. Prince developed a plan which was then modified in light of the new report from the abandoned shack reconnaissance received at 14:30. He proposed that the Rangers would be split into 2 groups. About 90 Rangers of Company C, led by Prince, would attack the main camp and escort the prisoners out, while 30 Rangers of a platoon from F Company, commanded by Lieutenant John Murphy, would signal the start of the attack by firing into various Japanese positions at the rear of the camp at 19:30. Prince predicted that the raid would be accomplished in 30 minutes or less. Once Prince had ensured that all of the POWs were safely out of the camp. He would fire a red flare, indicating that all troops should fall back to a meet-up at Pampanga River, 2.4 kilometers north of the camp, where 150 guerrillas would be ready with Carabao Port carts to transport the POWs. One of Prince's primary concerns was the flatness of the countryside. The Japanese had kept the terrain clear of vegetation to ensure that approaching guerrilla attacks could be seen, as well as to spot prisoner escapes. Prince knew his rangers would have to crawl through a long open field on their bellies, right under the eyes of the Japanese guards. There would only just be an hour of full darkness as the sun set below the horizon and the moon rose. This would still present the possibility of the Japanese guard noticing their movement, especially with a nearly full moon. If the rangers were discovered, the only planned response was for everyone to immediately stand up and rush the camp. However, the rangers were not aware that the Japanese did not have any searchlight that could be used to illuminate the perimeter. Pahota suggested that to distract the guards, a United States Army Air Forces airplane should buzz the camp to divert the guards' eyes to the sky. Mochi agreed with the idea, and a radio request was sent to command to ask for a plane to fly over the camp while the men made their way across the field. In preparation for possible injuries or wounds received during the encounter with the Japanese, the battalion sergeant, Captain Jimmy Fisher, developed a makeshift hospital in the Plateros schoolhouse. By dawn on January 30, the road in front of the camp was clear of traveling Japanese troops. Mochi made plans to protect the POWs once they were freed from the camp. Two groups of guerrillas of the Luzon Guerrilla Armed Forces, one under Pahota and another under Captain Eduardo Huzon, would be sent in opposite directions to hold the main road near the camp. Pahota and 200 guerrillas were to set up a roadblock next to the wooden bridge over the Cabo River. This setup, northeast of the prisoner camp, would be the first line of defense against the Japanese forces camped across the river, which would be within earshot of the assault on the camp. Hozon and his 75 guerrillas, along with a Ranger bazooka team, would set up a roadblock 800 yards or 730 meters southwest of the prisoner camp to stop any Japanese forces that would arrive from Cabanatuan. Both groups would each place 25 landmines in front of their positions, and one guerrilla from each group was given a bazooka to destroy any armored vehicles. After the POWs and the remainder of the attacking force had reached the Pampanga River meeting point, Prince would fire a second flare to indicate to the ambush sites to pull back gradually if they face opposition and head to Platero. As the POWs had no knowledge of the upcoming assault, they went through their normal routine that night. The previous day, two Filipino boys had thrown rocks into the prisoner side of the camp with notes attached, "Be ready to go out." Assuming that the boys were pulling a prank, the POWs disregarded the notes. The POWs were becoming more wary of the Japanese guards, believing that any time in the next few days they could be massacred for any reason. They figured that the Japanese would not want them to be rescued by advancing American forces, regain their strength, and return to fight the Japanese again. In addition, the Japanese could kill the prisoners to prevent them from telling the atrocities of the Bataan Death March or the conditions in the camp. With the limited Japanese guard, a small number of prisoners had already decided that they would make an escape attempt at about 2000 hours.